Right. And also, I think I'm supposed to do this at the end, but I'll go ahead and show you. Hold on, let me present here. Bear with me now. Let's see. Screen 2. Let's see. All right, somebody tell me if you can see the first opening slide. Yes? Okay, very good. All right, bear with me if I don't do this correctly. Like I said, this is a learning curve for me. So somebody speak up if something goes awry and I don't seem to notice. If you go all the way to the bottom of the presentation, I know you guys have access to that. I have linked the sign-in sheet for today. I think I'm supposed to do that at the end, but I'm afraid I'll forget to tell you. So that is your documentation piece that you were here for this presentation. So if you can't find that, let me know. It's at the very last slide under my contact information. So wanted to share that with you. Hi, welcome everybody. Also, I typically get a lot of energy from just the presentation and the conversation that I typically have. So if you have a question or an example or a thought as we're talking, let's please try to make this as interactive as possible. I know this is just a little strange. It may be the way of the world these days. I'm not sure if this is here to stay, but I guess I better get used to it. But anyway, so please just feel free to interact and share and talk. I'll try to do a couple things, but I know this is a little bit different than what we're typically used to for some presentations. So I'll just jump right in. And again, feel free to just jump in yourself if there's a question or a thought. Need access. Okay, let me try to work on that, Mrs. Engel. Let's see.
Did anybody else have that issue? They needed access to sign in.
To sign in. Sorry.
Yeah, at the end. So we can do it later, though. Don't worry about it. Go ahead and
No, I needed to know that. I am world's worst about changing the permissions, so thank you for that.
Okay.
Let's see. Okay, editor. All right, that should be changed. You should be able to sign in now. And if you're joining us, the presentation at the very last slide where it says questions and feedback, slide 37, there is a sign-in sheet there. Thank you for that, Ms. Engel. All right, am I back to slide 1 from your view? Yes, okay, thank you for that. All right, well, now that we got that out of the way, those of you that are new to the district or that I haven't met yet, excuse me, I'm Shelly Worley and I'm the principal at Cedar Ridge Primary. I think I met some of you yesterday for new teachers. So welcome to Branson. I hope everything's going well. I'm the principal at the primary, but I also have 4 children in the district, and I'll talk a little bit about that here in a few minutes. That's definitely a part of my story and my experiences that I'm going to share with you today. The title of the presentation, as you can see, is Be the One, and I think you were, if you were new in TIP yesterday, that was a message that was definitely hit home. And I think that's probably why we're in education, is to try to be there for our kids. The next part of the title says an educator's first steps to understanding trauma-informed practices. So if you've been in Branson for a long time, or even if you've just joined our team, Trauma is going to be something, unfortunately, that you are going to experience in the lives of our kids, probably, possibly on a daily basis. And I think that educators are unprepared for trauma. We don't know what it looks like. We don't know how to handle it. It scares us. It's not something that we are used to. And so, but it's our reality every day. And so this has really become a topic that is near and dear to my heart because I work with it professionally every day in the kids that we serve. But I also have a very personal story that I will share with you here in just a little bit that has really helped me really connect and dive in out of a necessity to work with my own children. So that's kind of the background of the story, and I'm just going to dive in. So I have been in Branson. This is my 17th year in Branson and my 22nd year in education. I think this is my 13th year here at Cedar Ridge Primary. And what I noticed and what I've continued to notice is that Branson has changed over the last 5 to 10 years. And I don't know that it's Branson or if it's just children, society. There's probably a lot of research that we could talk about. But I began as an administrator 13 years ago here at the primary, and the things that I am doing today and have been doing for the last 5 years in Branson were not the things that I was doing when I first started, and definitely not the things I first started doing as an educator 17 years ago in Branson. So unfortunately, these are not positive changes that I've seen in Branson. Our demographic has changed, the mobility, the poverty, the crime rate, all of those things, unfortunately, are not improving. They're just continuing to be higher and more prevalent. One thing that I noticed over the past 5 to 10 years is that teachers are unable to handle the behaviors. And it's not because our teachers aren't trying, and it's not because our teachers are scared or they don't love the kids, but the intensity and the severity of the behaviors of what we're seeing just continue to increase. Teachers were ready to quit. I've had teachers that have been in my building and teachers that I know throughout the district that have quit, and they are selling insurance or they are doing something different. And I don't start this with doom and gloom to scare you. I start this though just to give you a reality of this is where we were, and this is hopefully not where we're going. But we kind of need to assess reality to be able to figure out a plan to make something different. I also experienced that even, if teachers weren't quitting and they were sticking it out, they were crying on a daily basis, or they were taking a break and going to sit in their car and were crying, and the emotions were just running really high, and that concerns me. Behaviors, over the past 5 to 10 years have been increasing with intensity. It used to be, you had the kid in the grade level or the 2 or 3 kids in the grade level that everybody knew, had some challenges, and they were the chair throwers and they were the kids that ran. And now we have 1 to 5 of those kids in every classroom at the elementary level. And I'm sure at the secondary level, you get them as well. My time as an administrator has really changed. My goal is to be an instructional leader and to be in there coaching and supporting and lifting teachers and parents up. But my time really as a principal has been playing what I call whack-a-mole. For those of you that are old enough to know the video game, or not the video game, the fun game whack-a-mole. That's what I felt like I was doing, is putting out fire after fire after fire. And they were behavioral fires. It wasn't something that I really felt like was my calling and what I needed to do, but that was the job at hand. We were very, very reactive and not proactive. And so all of these together really came to me as a professional, and I thought, we got to do something different. This isn't working. So that's kind of the backstory professionally about 5 to 10 years ago, what was going on in my mind and what I was experiencing here at Cedar Ridge Primary. And if you've been here for a while, I see some head shakes, so maybe you've experienced some of those things too. I just bring this next slide up just to kind of remind you, if you are new to education, this is just something to kind of look at. This is the hierarchy of learning pyramid, and what I will tell you is that I've seen lots of conversation over social media. I've seen lots of articles, you know, and I'm not getting into a debate here, but I've seen lots of conversation about the role of education. And I think it was pretty clear over quarantine that the role of school and education goes much beyond academics. Like it or not, we feed our kids if they're hungry. We serve as a safety net for emotional stability for a lot of them. And if you look on this hierarchy of learning pyramid, this is what we know about human behavior. This is what we know about how humans, all of us, all of the kids that we're going to encounter here on the 24th, this is what they have to have. And you can see at the very top there is learning. So I don't think it's out of the question that we need to make sure that our kids are fed. They need to feel emotionally and physically safe. They need to have relationships and love and friends. And they need to feel good about themselves. And all of those things are going to come before we can do our job of teaching and learning. So the debate can rage on about, you know, our job in education. But if they are not getting those 4 layers before they come to us for education, our efforts are probably pretty futile for what we're doing here with teaching and learning. So I am a big proponent of making sure that we can get these needs met, or what we're doing with our academic teaching and learning probably isn't going to stick. I think Branson lends itself to those things. We do a lot of things well. You know, we feed kids, we love on kids. If they don't have shoes, we have a social work office that provides shoes usually that day. So we are set up very well to take care of those needs. But I just wanted to remind you of this pyramid of learning, because we have to have those in place before the top layer is ever going to happen. That's my soapbox. Okay, so I shared with you a little bit of my professional journey 5 to 10 years ago, kind of what I was seeing and what was happening. I'm going to share with you my concurrent personal experience. And it occurred to me that this picture is pretty old. So this is my husband, Ryan. He is a coach. He coaches and teaches at New Covenant Academy in Springfield. And those 2 cute little guys, this is Austin and Tristan. They're going into 3rd grade. So this was their kindergarten picture. So I need to update this picture. But thank goodness they're cute, because they are hard and they are tough. They're kind of hell on wheels every day. But I am better because of them. Just a quick backstory. My husband and I married kind of late in life, and we lost a baby early on. And just, you know, as if you've been in education for a while, maybe you're like me, you know, I see a kiddo and fall in love with that kiddo, and they have circumstances and I want to take them home. That's not exactly what happened to me, but kind of. So anyway, my husband and I felt the call to foster. We knew we wanted to be parents, and it didn't really matter to us how that happened. And so we went through the journey of fostering. And God just really works in crazy ways. The backstory of these little boys is that they were somehow a part of Branson Parents as teachers. And so I'm the supervisor for Branson Parents as teachers. So I knew of these boys before they came to be a part of our family. Our documentation with the Taney County DFS is that these boys were hotlined 13 times before they came to us at 14 months of age. So you can do the math on that. So these little boys, they're going into 3rd grade, like I said, at Cedar Ridge Elementary. They don't know their story yet. We probably need to have that story at some point, but I had a conversation the other day with somebody, and they said, you know what, their past is not who they are, and I love that they don't know that story yet. So that's kind of the backstory of them. What I would tell you is that I said we got them at 14 months, and you know, we've had a ton of support. About 2 years of age, we started seeing some pretty significant behaviors, and we live in Nixa. I've driven to Branson for 17 years, but we live in Nixa, and I kid you not when I say this, that there's probably not a daycare at the time in Ozark or Nixa that these two boys haven't been kicked out of. They are very cute, but they have some really significant behaviors that started very, very young. And we have been very blessed to have a village here that has wrapped their arms around them. But I say that just with all transparency because here I am, an early childhood educator that has a lot of years of experience. I have a lot of training, and I was not successful with them at the time. They were getting kicked out, and I didn't know what to do. So if you go back to my professional story, all of that was happening professionally at the same time that this was happening personally. So you can imagine kind of what was going on in my world. And I thought, oh my goodness, I have to figure this out. And something just clicked. I'm kind of a type A personality. And so I thought, you know what, I'm going to dive in and I'm going to do research and I'm going to figure out what in the world is happening, because it's happening at school and it's happening in our home. And so that's when I discovered trauma. And when I started reading about the experiences of trauma and how it affects kids, it just clicked. And I said, oh my gosh, this is it. This is what's happening with our kids at school. And this is what's happening with my kids at home. So I don't think I shared with you, the boys came to us at 14 months. They came out of a situation of neglect. It really wasn't abuse that we know of. We think mom and dad, or mom was probably doing all sorts of drugs, maybe drinking during pregnancy. And I've had so many people in my life say, oh my goodness, they don't remember. Thank goodness for that. And I even said to my husband at one time, I'm so glad we got them in time. And that was really before I knew their story and knew how trauma had impacted their brain. But what I now know is that, let me go back. Is that even though they don't remember their trauma, developmentally, their brains are wired differently. That developmental piece that happened very young has had a lasting impact. Now, the good news is we have an opportunity to correct that, and we have an opportunity to pour into the other side of that. So sometimes if you're in your classroom and you're working with a kid and you are feeling hopeless and you don't know what to do, it is a very long process. These boys have been with us for 7 years now, and they are not fixed by any means. They are hard and challenging every single day. But I will tell you that they are way better, and they've made a lot of progress, in the 7 years that we've had them. 7 years is a long time. But that's what I want to talk about today. And I know I've been rambling for a while and my time is ticking, but that's the backstory that I think really is important for you to understand. So moving on to my next slide here. If I could go back to my former self, back 7 years ago, this is some things that I wish I would have known. Many kids come from hard places. Now that sounds like kind of just a really simple statement, and you're probably like, well, of course, we know that. I didn't know that. I have been blessed to grow up in a 2-parent home. I had everything I needed. I had everything I wanted. I was probably a little spoiled, to be honest with you. And so the concept that kids come from hard places was something I really had to figure out. I didn't understand that kids were homeless and they lived in the campground and nobody loved them or fed them, or all of those things that we've all experienced as educators. I had to wrap my head around that. The next point, they may have invisible disabilities. This is something that when it clicked with me, it really helped me understand. You don't look at my boys and know that they have a disability. You don't see that their brains are wired differently. Sometimes I think that if there was a physical disability, it might be a little bit easier to see. But I really think if you can look at trauma and how it affects the developing brain as a disability, that really helps your mindset, or it did me anyway. Research has showed us that their brains, the developmental brain of a trauma child, is wired differently. There's a lot of research and scans I could pull up and show you. There's absolutely an impact on brain development when the trauma happens at those developmental years. So I think like I said, some people just have the mindset that, oh, the kids didn't remember their trauma. They don't, they don't know what happened, or they weren't even born yet. Trauma can happen in the womb, and there's a lot of research out there now that suggests that trauma can even be passed down genetically if mom had experienced trauma. So lots of new research on that. You can look that up, but I want to let you know that developmental trauma is a real thing, and it's a invisible disability. Another thing I would really tell myself 7-10 years ago, traditional discipline may not work. So typically educators go back into a school setting because we liked school, we were successful, and we kind of parent the way we were parented. We probably educate the way we were educated, or the way that our cooperating teacher kind of modeled for us. Some of my best teachers 10-15 years ago were very traditional teachers. Guys, this does not work necessarily with our kids from trauma. They do not react to a very black and white teaching. There is not a one size fits all model. So if you are in a situation with kiddos that are from trauma, and you are trying to say this is black and this is white, they're going to live in the world of gray. So what I want to encourage you to do is not to feel like you have to get yourself locked into that. Don't put yourself in a corner by saying, all my kids are going to do this, because that's where some of our troubles go. I have a great visual that I usually hand out, and I'd love to get it to you. But not every kid is going to need the same thing. We differentiate when we differentiate lessons, because academically they're all over the place. If you take the perspective of socially, emotionally, our kids are all over the place and are at different levels, and they need different things, I think that's going to set you up for success better than putting yourself in a situation where everything is black and white when you're talking about social emotional needs of kids and response to behaviors. Another thing I would tell myself 10 years ago is you're going to need a team. I can't do this by myself. These behaviors are too hard. The needs of the kids are too significant. It is okay to ask for help. I know, as a young educator years ago, I didn't want my principal to know that I was drowning or I was unsuccessful with a student. I didn't want to admit, I needed help. And I know what that feels like. But I'm here to tell you, as an administrator, I would much rather you come to me and say, I don't know what to do with this kid, I need help, before you get to the point that you're crying in your car or you are leaving the field of education. That is never where we want to be. I want to partner with you, and I know these needs are too significant. It's going to take a team. It's going to take a village. I don't know what I would have done or continue to do for my boys if I didn't have a team of professionals surrounding us and helping them with therapy and all of their various needs. The last bullet point on my slide here is fair is not equal, and that kind of goes back to that black and white. I live in a world of gray because every kiddo that comes in this building, every kiddo that comes in your class, I firmly believe needs something different, academically as well as socially, emotionally. Get to know their story, get to know what they need. The next part, I'm not going to take the time to show you this video because I've been yapping a long time and I'm kind of behind a little bit, but it is a learning brain versus a survival brain. And the video, if you click on the video link there, I would just ask you to watch that sometime. I think it's about 5 minutes. It nicely explains the difference between learning brain and survival brain. And basically the gist of it is that if a kiddo is in survival brain, and you can see that diagram there, if they are fearful, if they have hunger, any of those things that we looked at on that lower part of the pyramid, there is no way they are going to be in the right mindset to be able to learn. The next part there is that emotional state. So you can see that some descriptives there is, they're back talking, they're sassing, they're yelling, they have a need for connection. Their emotional stability, they may not be throwing a chair, but they are not in a calm state of mind. And then the top is the executive brain. And we talk to kids about their brain states. you know, and they start to know that, hey, they're in survival brain or they're in an emotional brain, and they know that they need to get to that thinking brain, that learning brain, before they can ever regulate themselves to talk about math or writing or whatever it is you're trying to address with them. So I think this is a great model for educators. It's also a great model for students to be able to understand that. And we use this with kids as young as preschool, and they can understand that. And I think that is able as a connection for them to be able to say, okay, I'm in my survival brain. How am I going to get myself up into the emotional state and then into the executive state? There's all kinds of skills that we can teach our kids to be, and ourselves, to be able to stop and pause and understand our brain state, and then do something different if we need to move ourselves up. Here at Cedar Ridge Primary, we have invested a lot of time and effort into a social emotional platform called Conscious Discipline. So that is something that we feel really works well for us. Mrs. Ingalls here on this conference call, and she is all in with Conscious Discipline. So I know at Cedar Ridge Elementary, there are some people there that are using that model as well. I'm not trying to sell it. I don't work for Conscious Discipline. I just feel like it's been something that has been very successful for us. It is a pre-K-8 model. So, you know, even if you are at a higher level, you know, I would encourage you to check that out. It is a way of really looking at the brain states, and it starts with adults. It really starts with looking at ourselves, because if we are not in control, if we're not in our executive state, there's no way that our kiddos are going to be able to be in the executive state either. So it's really been a life-changing philosophy for us to support. So I wanted to throw that out there. Just a few things about children in trauma. I don't know your level of understanding, your level of experience with trauma, so I'm just going to quickly go over some of this. Children are more vulnerable to the stress of trauma. So research has completely flipped about trauma. And years ago, the thought used to be that trauma affected adults greater than it did kids, because the thinking is that most adults remember their trauma, especially if it happened at an adult age or a late childhood. That is not true. The research is really clear, like I've shared with you, is that when a kiddo experiences trauma during a time of brain development, which could be in utero all the way through, basically preteen years, their brain is forming during that trauma. And, you've probably heard the phrase fight, flight, or freeze. When a kiddo is in persistent trauma, their brain is wired to fight, flight, or freeze all the time. That's how they survive, and that's how they learn. Us as adults, if we develop fairly normally and then we experience trauma as an adult, our brains can go back and be able to pull from those experiences in our developmental years. So it's a very different thought. So I just wanted to point that out, because a lot of people think that trauma affects adults greater than it does kiddos, and actually that's very much the opposite. Children's responses to trauma are complex and different from those of adults. We often see the kiddos that throw the chairs and cuss us out and hit and kick and run out of the school building. Those are the easy kids to spot, because that behavior is hard to ignore and it's just very in your face. I would say too that sometimes I think we miss the mark on the kids that internalize that trauma and that behavior, because we don't see the throwing the chair. They're not cussing us out. They may be the kids that are completely withdrawn, and maybe they're not causing a problem, but they are hard to, they're internalizing that trauma. So trauma doesn't necessarily exhibit itself in the same way for everybody, and you see that as an adult as well. But I just think I wanted to point that out, that it could manifest itself in lots of different ways. And then the next bullet just talks about some ways that it could manifest itself in: memory, cognitive processing, just behavior is the easy one. It could be even physical changes. Let's see, just a little bit more information about repeated traumatizing experiences. So something just to note there too about trauma and behavior. Research will tell us that ongoing neglect of students, so ongoing lack of food, ongoing lack of social emotional support, housing, whatever it might be, ongoing trauma is going to be more severe than a one-time abuse situation. I think sometimes for myself, I thought, oh, my boys didn't come out of a situation of abuse. It was just neglect. I remember saying those words, just neglect. But honestly, research tells us that ongoing neglect is going to have more of a developmental impact than a one-time abuse situation on a child. So that's just something to think about. Children's symptoms fall into the 4 major categories there. Persistent fear state, disorder of memory, dysregulation of affect. So you see lots of kids that are dysregulated, and avoidance of intimacy. So kiddos that do not want to connect with you because they don't trust adults, whether they can say those words or not, that is ingrained in them because that's been their survival mechanism for so long. Okay, so just to talk about how does the state of Missouri recognize trauma? And this is on their website. I think I may have it linked somewhere. There are steps in the continuum for how DESE recognizes trauma. An organization, a classroom, a teacher, an individual starts out being trauma aware. Then the next continuum is trauma sensitive and trauma responsive. Nobody's asking you to go through all of these right now. I just want you to be aware that there are steps in the continuum. Trauma aware is, I would say you're trauma aware right now. You are here and you are learning and you've heard the term. You're just considering that this might be something that is impacting your kiddos. Trauma sensitive, again, you're understanding, you're exploring the principles, you're building consensus, maybe within your team of understanding that this is something that you need to look at. And 3 there, you're considering the implications of adopting the principles within your organization. So I think we are there. We are talking about what do we need to do to support our kiddos that haven't been in school, since March. And what has their home life been like since they've been out? I think this is unfortunately something that we are probably going to experience fast and furious on August 24th. And I pray that it doesn't have the impact that I think it might, but unfortunately, I'm just not optimistic about that. I don't know what our kids have been doing. I don't know where they've been, and I'm concerned. Trauma responsive. Organizations have begun to change. So we're looking at doing things differently. We're rethinking routines and infrastructure. And that's really an ongoing pursuit, I would say, here in our district. I would say at Cedar Ridge Primary. We're always looking to get better. We're always looking to do things different. But I really think that I have personally gone through that both professionally and personally. I used to be pretty black and white, like I mentioned earlier, and now I live in a whole world of gray because kids need different things, and that's okay. That used to not be okay with me. I used to, very black and white, but kids need different things, and if I'm going to meet a trauma kid or any kid for that, where they are, I have to be okay that I'm going to do something different for one kid than the other. Okay, this is a pretty important piece, and I don't know that we have a lot of time. I can't see all of you, but I can see some of you. How many of you have heard of the ACEs study or maybe taken the ACEs study? ACEs stands for Adverse Childhood Experiences. I see some of you. Give me a nod or something. Show of hands. Yes? Okay. If you have not, typically during my presentations, I give everybody a chance to take the ACEs study. I have linked it here. There is a few questions. I believe there's a longer version and a shortened version. So I think you can get a 10-question ACEs quiz and a 20-question ACEs quiz. Basically, it is yes or no questions that you answer about yourself. About 5 years ago, I did this with the staff here at Cedar Ridge Primary when we were just starting to understand trauma and dive in. This was life-changing. for us to be able to look at ourselves, because if we can't understand ourselves and our own history, I don't think we're going to be as prepared to work with our kiddos that are from challenging places. So if you have not taken the ACEs score or found your ACEs score, I would highly recommend you do that. It's very personal. So it's nothing I would ever ask anybody to share, but it's very thought-provoking to think about where you're at on the scale. I will tell you on the scale from 1 to 10, obviously, if you go, the higher you go on the scale, the more adverse childhood experiences you had. And let me kind of give you some stats here as I'm talking. You can kind of read the stats. Let's see, young children exposed to 5 or more ACEs in the first 3 years of childhood face a 76% likelihood of having 1 or more delays in their language, emotional, or brain development. That stat always just kicks me in the stomach, thinking about what can happen developmentally and the outcome of that. 26% of children in the US will witness or experience a traumatic event before they turn 4. So if you take that stat and apply it to the kids in your classroom, especially if you're at a secondary level or if you're a teacher that has multiple classrooms, that's about a fourth of your class that's going to come to you experiencing trauma, early childhood trauma. So that's something that is real that we deal with on a daily basis. Here are some more stats here. You can just see how they have lasting effects going into adulthood. So going back to the ACEs quiz, on a scale from 1 to 10, 10 would be yes, you've experienced all 10 of those adverse childhood experiences. And I'm really sorry if that's your score. You were an overcomer because here you are. You know, more than likely you may know somebody that is on the higher end of the scale. You know, I told you I've been blessed with a very blessed childhood. My score is 0. I did not experience any of those things. My husband, on the other hand, and yes, he knows I talk about him in my presentations, he didn't have a terrible childhood. It was just different than me. And he has a score of about a 4. And so just some things that I've learned about the differences between he and myself. You know, he has some triggers, and I'll just tell a really quick story maybe that will resonate with some of you. I don't know if, you know, if you get a fly or 2 in your house every now and then, but that happens at our house. The boys leave the door open and I get a random fly. No big deal for me. I get the fly swatter out or I shoo the fly away, and it doesn't do much for me, okay? You know, we don't have them all the time, and it's not something that I have like a swarm of flies in my house. So it doesn't trigger me. My husband, on the other hand, he flips out when a fly comes in our house. And for the longest time, I was like, calm down. It's not a big deal. Let's get the fly swatter. You know, don't worry about it. It's just a fly. And I could never really understand like why that bothered him so bad, because it was just, to me, it was a minuscule thing. And one day out of the blue, he expanded and he said, I can't stand the flies because it reminds me of when I was growing up and our house was filled with flies and there was flies all over the food and they would bite my legs. And so he really just opened up and expanded. And in that moment, I realized that that was part of his ACEs and that was part of his brain development. And that was a trigger for him. And so if you can apply that to things that happen with your kids, it may be something that is very minimal for you and you don't quite understand their trigger. Chances are it might be something that they've experienced that was traumatic for them. You'll see research on smells. Smells can be a very positive trigger, but they can also be a very negative trigger. You know, I hear a song come on the radio and it takes me back to, you know, my high school days, or maybe it was a song in my wedding. Songs and things like that can be very positive or very negative. But I guess what I want you to take away from that is that when a child reacts a certain way, I want you to pause and think about what is the message or what are they needing? Is that a trigger from something that they can't control that might have to do with their history? So if you do some digging, chances are you might be able to come back and have some information. I know I'm running out of time, but I want to hit on this really quickly. Talking about childhood trauma and an invisible disability is certainly not an excuse. I understand the implications are going to be with my boys. When they get to their teenage years and, let's just say they get pulled over for speeding and they are triggered by, a police officer telling them no or giving them a ticket. I understand what that can potentially look like. So I am in no way excusing their behavior. But what I am trying to do is give them some resiliency now, give them some executive functioning skills now so that they don't have to face that later on. I think you've probably heard, the school to prison pipeline, and there's all kinds of studies out there that show the amount of foster kids that are in prison. And I can guarantee you that those kiddos that are in foster care that had to prison, it's because of the trauma, and they didn't learn the skills, and they didn't have people in their lives that were able to help them through that. So I just lead you with some of these. It's really hard when a chair's coming at you, or you're getting called, all kinds of names. If you can stop and pause and look beyond the behavior and not take it personally in that moment, the behavior typically is a cry for help. It's a story of something that they are experiencing that they need help with. This right here says, remember, everyone in the classroom has a story that leads to misbehavior or defiance, but 9 times out of 10, that story won't make you angry, but it will break your heart. I didn't share with you that my husband and I have 2 biological sons that are younger than our 3rd graders. One is going into kindergarten, one's going into preschool. Love them dearly. They have not experienced the trauma that my twins have. I have a kiddo that is going to be in preschool as a 4-year-old, and he's just ornery. He's just flat out ornery. And so is his behavior from trauma? Nope. He's just being a stinker. He's just being a 4-year-old brat. There's a difference in learned behavior and trauma behavior. And if you dig down to it, your reaction is going to be different and your strategy needs to be different. I'm going to skip through this. I know that I'm running out of time. There's an article here that I typically have people discuss. I've linked it. This was really the turning point for our staff. This was really an article on, well, what do we do about it? What's next? How do I help these kids from trauma? And the gist of it is connection, love, connection. Kids know when you like them and when you don't like them. And if you can look past the behavior and see that as a cry for help and try to dig in with a strategy that's going to help with that behavior, that's your number one go-to, is that connection. So I would encourage you to check out that article. I really like this piece right here. It just shows the relationship between creating a safe environment, building relationships, and teaching them those deficit skills. My son, every now and then he will react, and he said something the other day when I went to pick him up. He said, "Mom, I hate you." Well, I'm his person, so we're connected. He was really mad because I had come to pick him up from a friend's house, and he didn't have the skill to say what he was really feeling. So what he said was, "I hate you." He didn't mean that. He just didn't have the right words. But if I would have taken that personally and reacted, I would have just continued that momentum of being ugly. But I have to stop and teach him, oh, you're really disappointed. You wanted to stay later. You could say, "Mom, can I have 10 more minutes here at my friend's house?" So if you can plug those skills in, they're missing skills from those kiddos. That's when changes are going to occur. I'm going to skip down through here. I'm just going to share with you a few resources. Those are linked, most of them. This is a great book to read, The Boy Who Was Raised as a Dog. Help for Billy, our district did this a couple of years ago. I would start with this. This really outlines the difference between a kiddo that has experienced trauma and not. This is a great, great book. A couple of videos to watch. Resilience, I have it if you want to borrow it. Paper Tigers, I hear is on Netflix. Just lots of different resources and PD opportunities. So If you run across anything, just keep this. And if you need resources from me, I'm very happy to be that person. I'm not going to have time to talk about all of these. Here's my contact information. I'm very passionate, so I would love to connect with you. Make sure you do the sign-in sheet so you get credit. And if you have anything else ever to share or need any resources, please, please, please contact me. I'm sorry I have talked way too long. Thank you. Have a great day.
Thank you.
Where was the sign-in sheet at?
It's connected. It's on the last slide, questions and feedback down at the very bottom.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you, everybody.
Thank you, Shelley.
You're welcome. Thanks for joining. I'll stay on if you have questions, but I know you have another session.